I'm Wade, 32 years old, and my grandfather was my hero. When he left me his beautiful craftsman house in his will, I thought it was the greatest gift anyone could give me. My sister Rebecca had always been my parents' favorite, but I never expected they'd demand I sell my inheritance to buy her a bigger home. The betrayal cut deep, especially when Dad looked me in the eye and said those words I'll never forget. Before I tell you how my own parents tried to steal my inheritance, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with family members who think your belongings are theirs for the taking. My grandfather Samuel was more than just a relative. He was my mentor, my friend, and the person who understood me better than anyone else in our family. From the time I was 6 years old, I spent nearly every weekend at his house trailing behind him in his workshop, learning how to identify different types of wood by their grain patterns, watching in awe as his weathered hands transformed raw lumber into beautiful furniture. The smell of sawdust and varnish became the scent of happiness for me. "Wade, my boy," he'd say, placing his rough, calloused hand on my shoulder. "Craftsmanship isn't just about making things. It's about putting your soul into something that outlasts you." My sister Rebecca, 3 years older than me, never shared this interest. She'd roll her eyes whenever Mom and Dad suggested she join me at Grandpa's house. "Why would I want to spend my Saturday getting dirty in that old house?" she'd complain. Instead, she'd stay home talking on the phone with friends or shopping at the mall with Mom. Grandpa Samuel's house itself was a masterpiece. Built in the 1920s, it stood proudly in one of the city's most historic neighborhoods. It wasn't massive by modern standards, but what it lacked in size it made up for in character. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious living room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen with the original cabinetry that Grandpa had maintained meticulously. The crown jewel was the hand-carved woodwork throughout the house, ornate baseboards, window frames, with delicate details, and a staircase banister that curved gracefully to the second floor. The backyard was nearly half an acre, unusual for an urban property, with mature oak trees providing shade over a garden that bloomed spectacularly in spring. A detached garage had been converted into Grandpa's workshop, where he'd taught me everything he knew about working with wood. As I grew older, my weekends at Grandpa's house shaped my future. I pursued architecture in college, fascinated by the intersection of beauty and functionality in buildings. Grandpa beamed with pride at my graduation, telling everyone who would listen that his grandson was going to build beautiful things that matter. Despite landing a good job at a respected architecture firm, I struggled financially. Student loans took a hefty chunk of my monthly income, and the city's high cost of living meant I was renting a small 1-bedroom apartment that consumed nearly 40% of my paycheck. I drove a 10-year-old car and budgeted carefully for every expense. At 32, home ownership seemed like a distant dream. Rebecca, meanwhile, had taken a different path. She'd majored in marketing and, through connections from our parents' country club friends, landed a high-paying job at a prestigious firm right out of college. She married Tyler, a financial advisor from a wealthy family, in a lavish ceremony that our parents paid for entirely. Their wedding gift to the couple was a 2-week honeymoon in Bali, staying at a 5-star resort. The pattern of my parents favoring Rebecca wasn't new. They'd paid for her entire college education while insisting I take out loans for mine. "Your sister isn't as academically inclined as you," they'd explained. "She needs the advantage of graduating debt-free." When she wanted a new car after her promotion, Dad helped her with the down payment. When she and Tyler bought their first house in an upscale neighborhood, our parents gifted them expensive furniture. I never complained about this disparity. I loved my sister despite her occasional entitled attitude, and I understood that parents sometimes develop different relationships with their children. Besides, I had Grandpa Samuel, who saw something in me that my parents didn't seem to notice. In the last few years of his life, Grandpa's health began to decline. First came the arthritis that made woodworking painful, then the heart problems that left him short of breath, and finally the cancer diagnosis that changed everything. When he refused to move to a nursing facility, I started visiting daily, helping with medications, cooking meals, and simply keeping him company. Rebecca visited occasionally, usually for brief, awkward periods, where she'd sit uncomfortably in the living room, checking her watch and making excuses to leave early. My parents came more regularly, but focused mainly on discussing treatment options and practical matters rather than simply being present with him. During those final months, Grandpa and I had many long conversations about life regrets, hopes, and the nature of family. Sometimes we'd sit in comfortable silence, watching baseball games or old westerns on his television. Other times he'd tell me stories about his youth, about building the business he'd eventually sold for a comfortable retirement, about meeting and falling in love with my grandmother who had passed away a decade earlier. When he died 6 months ago, I felt like a part of me had been torn away. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences, with me moving through the motions like a sleepwalker. Through my grief, I noticed that while Rebecca cried appropriately at the service, she was back to posting vacation photos on social media just 3 days later. My parents mourned in their practical way, efficiently sorting through paperwork and making necessary arrangements. None of us knew then how Grandpa's final gift to me would upend our family dynamic forever. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered at the office of Martin Coleman, my grandfather's attorney. The wood-paneled room with its leather chairs and bookshelves filled with legal tomes seemed appropriate for the occasion, as if the setting itself honored Grandpa's appreciation for craftsmanship. Martin, a bald man with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle demeanor, explained that Grandpa had updated his will just 6 months before his death. He'd been very specific about his wishes and had written letters to accompany the legal document. "The estate is fairly straightforward," Martin explained, adjusting his glasses. "Samuel's investments and savings will be divided equally among his 4 grandchildren when they each reach the age of 30. This meant my cousins from my uncle's side would receive their portions in the coming years, while Rebecca and I would get ours immediately." Then came the surprise. The house at 723 Maple Street, along with all its contents and the detached workshop, is bequeathed solely to my grandson Wade Alexander Harrison. The silence in the room was absolute. I felt everyone's eyes turn toward me as Martin handed me an envelope with my name written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. "Dear Wade," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't waste too much time grieving. You know I've never been patient." Despite the solemnity of the moment, I smiled at his characteristic directness. "I'm leaving you the house because you're the only one who truly appreciates what it represents. It's not just wood and glass and concrete. It's a testament to the belief that things should be built to last, that beauty matters in our everyday surroundings, and that a home should tell the story of those who live within it. You understand this in a way the others don't. Take care of the old place. Update what needs modernizing, but preserve its soul. Add your own chapter to its story. Most importantly, find happiness within these walls, whether that means living here yourself or eventually passing it on to someone who will cherish it as we have. You've been a blessing in my life, Wade. Your kindness during my final years meant more than you'll ever know. This house is not just my gift to you. It's my acknowledgement of the fine man you've become." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred my vision. I carefully folded the letter and looked up to find my family watching me with varying expressions. "Congratulations, Wade," my father said, his voice carefully neutral. "That's wonderful," my mother added, though her smile seemed strained. Rebecca's husband Tyler was the most enthusiastic. "Wow, what a windfall. That neighborhood has skyrocketed in value. You're sitting on a gold mine, Wade." Only Rebecca remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. As we left the attorney's office, the congratulations continued, seemingly genuine. My uncle clapped me on the back, saying, "Samuel always had a soft spot for you. Can't say I'm surprised." My mother hugged me and whispered, "He loved you so much, honey. I'm happy for you." Even Rebecca managed a tight smile and said, "You spent a lot of time with him. You deserve something special." That evening, alone in my apartment, I sat with the reality of this unexpected gift. The house I'd loved visiting my entire life was now mine. The financial burden of rent would disappear. The craftsmanship I'd admired since childhood would surround me daily. Most precious of all, I'd live surrounded by memories of the person who had believed in me most. I spent the next week making plans. My lease had 3 months remaining, which gave me time to organize the move. I visited the house daily, taking inventory of what I wanted to keep, what needed repair, and what renovations I might undertake while respecting the original character. My plans were modest but exciting. The electrical system needed updating for safety, and the kitchen appliances were outdated. The bathroom fixtures could use modernizing, but I wanted to preserve the original clawfoot tub and tile work. The hardwood floors needed refinishing, but their quality was exceptional. Every project I envisioned aimed to honor the house's history while making it functional for contemporary living. During one of my planning visits, I discovered something unexpected. While measuring a wall in Grandpa's bedroom for a potential bookcase, I noticed a slight irregularity in the wood paneling. Pressing gently, I found a hidden compartment containing a small wooden box. Inside were family photographs I'd never seen before Grandpa, as a young man standing proudly in front of the newly purchased house. My grandmother in a summer dress laughing in the garden, my father and uncle as children playing under the oak tree that still stood in the backyard. At the bottom of the box was another envelope with my name on it. Inside was a brief note. "Wade, if you found this, you're already making the house yours. Good. Here's a little more history to inspire you. Love, Grandpa." The discovery felt like a personal message from beyond a confirmation that the house was where I belonged. I framed several of the photographs, planning to display them prominently when I moved in. As I began the process of relocating, I noticed subtle changes in my family's behavior. My mother called frequently with unsolicited advice about home maintenance and insurance. My father suddenly had opinions about renovations, suggesting I modernize everything to maximize value. Rebecca began making comments about how lucky I was to get a free house, as if my years of relationship with Grandpa had been a calculated investment. At a family dinner 3 weeks after the will, reading these undercurrents became more noticeable. When I mentioned my plans to restore the original window frames rather than replace them with vinyl, Tyler scoffed. "That's throwing money away," he said. "You need to think about resale value. Nobody cares about original anything these days." "I'm not planning to sell," I replied. Rebecca exchanged a look with our mother that I couldn't quite interpret. As the dinner progressed, I noticed more whispered conversations and meaningful glances among my family members. When I left that night, I felt an uneasiness I couldn't explain, as if something was brewing beneath the surface of our usual interactions. That feeling proved all too accurate in the weeks to come. 6 weeks after inheriting the house, I had settled into a comfortable routine. Most of my belongings had been moved in, and I was gradually making the space my own while respecting its history. I'd refinished the hardwood floors myself, a laborious process that Grandpa would have appreciated. The gentle glow of the restored wood gave the entire house a warm ambiance that filled me with satisfaction every time I walked through the front door. One Sunday evening, my parents called to invite me to dinner the following night. "Rebecca and Tyler have some exciting news," Mom said. "We're having a special family dinner to celebrate." The dinner started pleasantly enough. Mom had prepared her signature roast beef with all the trimmings, and Dad opened an expensive bottle of wine. The atmosphere felt festive, though I noticed Rebecca seemed unusually nervous, fidgeting with her napkin and glancing frequently at Tyler. After the main course, as Mom served apple pie, Rebecca stood up holding her water glass. "We have an announcement," she said, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Tyler and I are expecting—" The table erupted in excitement. Mom burst into tears of joy while Dad pounded Tyler on the back with congratulations. I genuinely shared their happiness, standing to hug my sister. "You're going to be an amazing mom," I told her. "And you'll be Uncle Wade," she replied, her smile seeming sincere for the first time in weeks. As the initial excitement settled, Rebecca continued, "And there's more. We're having twins." This announcement triggered another round of celebrations. My parents were ecstatic at the prospect of 2 grandchildren at once. The conversation quickly turned to preparations, with Mom already planning a nursery and Dad offering financial advice about college savings accounts. After dessert, as we moved to the living room for coffee, the mood subtly shifted. Rebecca and Tyler exchanged glances before Tyler cleared his throat. "With the twins coming, we've been thinking about our living situation," he began. "Our house is really too small for a family of 4. Rebecca nodded earnestly. 3 bedrooms sounds like enough, but with 2 babies, plus we both work from home sometimes, and we'll need space for a nanny." We've been looking at larger houses in Lakewood Estates. Tyler continued naming one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, but the market is crazy right now. Everything is overpriced. I nodded sympathetically, not yet realizing where this conversation was heading. It's so frustrating, Rebecca sighed. Here we are about to have 2 babies and we can't find a suitable home while Wade has that huge house all to himself. The comment hung in the air. I felt the first stirring of unease. The house isn't that big, I said carefully. It's only 3 bedrooms. But it's just you, Rebecca countered. What do you need 3 bedrooms for? Before I could respond, I noticed my parents exchanging meaningful glances. Dad cleared his throat in the way he always did before making what he considered an important point. Actually, Wade, there's something we wanted to discuss with you about the house. The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's phone ringing. He stepped out to take the call, and the moment passed. We shifted to safer topics for the remainder of the evening, but I left with a sense of foreboding like dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The following morning, as I was measuring for bookshelves in what would become my home office, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my parents standing on the porch looking unusually serious. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by, Dad said, though something in his tone suggested this wasn't a spontaneous visit. I invited them in, offering coffee. As we sat in the living room, I noticed them glancing around as if seeing the house with new eyes. "You've done nice work with the floors," Mom commented. "It looks brighter in here." After a few minutes of small talk, Dad leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Wade, we need to talk about something important," he began. "It's about the house." "What about it?" I asked, though I already suspected what was coming. "Your mother and I have been thinking. With Rebecca expecting twins, their need for a larger home is urgent. Meanwhile, you're a single man with a house that's really too big for just one person." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "We think the fair thing would be for you to sell this house," he stated flatly. "The market is excellent right now. You could make a substantial profit. You could split the proceeds with your sister, allowing her and Tyler to buy a suitable home for their growing family. You could still buy yourself a nice condo with your half." The proposal hit me like a physical blow. I looked from my father to my mother, who was nodding in agreement. "This house was Grandpa's gift to me," I said finally. "He specifically wanted me to have it." "Samuel couldn't have known Rebecca would be having twins," Mom replied. "Family circumstances change. We need to adapt." "Rebecca's need is greater than yours right now," Dad added. "She's starting a family. This is about the next generation." The implication was clear. My sister's life choices were more valuable than mine. Her needs more important. Her future more worthy of investment. "I'm sorry," I said firmly. "I don't want to sell the house. Grandpa left it to me for a reason, and I intend to honor his wishes." My father's face hardened. "I'm disappointed in your selfishness, Wade. This is a free house that fell into your lap. Your sister has worked hard for everything she has." The unfairness of this statement was staggering. Rebecca had been given every advantage while I had worked my way through college and supported myself entirely since graduation. Furthermore, I had been the one who spent time with Grandpa, especially in his final months. "I'm not being selfish," I replied, keeping my voice level with effort. "I'm respecting Grandpa's final wishes. The house means something to me beyond its monetary value." My parents left shortly afterward, their disappointment palpable. My mother's parting words were, "Just think about it, Wade. Family should come first." The pressure didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I received a barrage of texts and calls. Rebecca sent tearful voice messages about how I was ruining her baby's future before they were even born. Tyler called with detailed financial arguments about how selling the house was the rational choice. Even distant relatives I rarely spoke with reached out to reason with me. The most painful call came from Rebecca late one night. "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed into the phone. "These are your niece and nephew we're talking about. Don't you want them to have the best possible start in life? A proper home with enough space to grow up happy and healthy. Your current house is perfectly nice," I reminded her. "Lots of families raise children in much smaller spaces. But we need more room. The nursery would have to be so small, and where would the nannies sleep? and we'd have no dedicated home office spaces. Wade, you're being cruel for no reason. It's just a house. You could buy another one. When I remained firm, she escalated. You know, Mom and Dad always said you were the reasonable one, the kind one. I guess they were wrong. I guess getting a taste of wealth has changed you. After hanging up, I sat in Grandpa's old armchair, running my hand over the worn leather armrest where his hand had rested thousands of times before. I wondered what he would advise me to do in this situation. Somehow I knew he wouldn't want his gift to become a source of such bitter division. Yet I also knew he wouldn't want me to surrender to emotional manipulation. The house represented something precious, not just family history, but a philosophy about craftsmanship, permanence, and caring for beautiful things. Selling it to finance my sister's upgrade to an even more luxurious lifestyle felt wrong on a fundamental level. As I sat there in the quiet house, I realized this conflict was about much more than property. It was about patterns of favoritism that had existed my entire life, about the assumption that my needs and wants would always take a back seat to Rebecca's, and about whether I would finally stand up for myself. A week after my parents' surprise visit, I received a text message from my father. Family dinner at our house tonight. 6 p.m. Important family matters to discuss. Be there. The directive tone left no room for negotiation. When I arrived at my parents' suburban home that evening, I immediately sensed the atmosphere of an ambush. Rebecca and Tyler's car was already in the driveway, along with my Uncle Robert's sedan. Inside, the dining room table was set formally, as if for a special occasion, but the mood was tense. My mother barely met my eyes when she hugged me in greeting. Once everyone was seated and the meal served, my father took control of the conversation. We're here to discuss Wade's inheritance and how it affects the entire family, he announced, as if opening a business meeting. I've asked Uncle Robert to join us because he was close to Dad and might offer some perspective. Uncle Robert nodded solemnly. I noticed he seemed uncomfortable, fidgeting with his napkin and avoiding direct eye contact with me. As you all know, my father continued, Rebecca and Tyler are expecting twins and they need a larger home. Wade's inheritance has put him in a position to help make this happen. Tyler, looking more like a businessman than a soon-to-be father in his crisp button-down shirt, pulled out a folder and removed several papers. I've done extensive research on the housing market, he said, sliding a printout toward me. Wade's house, in its current condition, could sell for approximately $800,000, possibly more with the right realtor. I felt my stomach tighten at the realization that they'd already been evaluating my home's market value. We've actually spoken to 3 different realtors, Rebecca added, not meeting my eyes. They all agree it's an excellent time to sell. One of them already has potential buyers interested in historic properties. The revelation that they had consulted realtors about my house without my knowledge or consent felt like a violation. They had been planning this behind my back, already setting wheels in motion, as if my agreement was a mere formality. You had realtors evaluate my house, I asked, my voice tight with controlled anger. Just preliminary discussions, my father said dismissively. Nothing binding. Tyler continued his presentation, explaining how the proceeds could be divided with Rebecca and I, each receiving equal shares after selling costs. He had even prepared a spreadsheet showing how much Rebecca and he would need for a down payment on their desired home in Lakewood Estates, and how much I would have left to invest in a suitable property for a single person. As Tyler spoke, Rebecca suddenly placed her hand on her stomach and interjected. I wasn't going to share this yet, but the doctor confirmed yesterday that we're having a boy and a girl. Perfect twins, one of each. This announcement, clearly timed for maximum emotional impact, drew exclamations of delight from my parents. My mother actually dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. All the more reason why this housing situation is urgent, my father said, turning back to me. A boy and a girl will definitely need separate bedrooms as they grow up. I took a deep breath before responding. I understand Rebecca and Tyler want a bigger house, but Grandpa left his house specifically to me with clear intentions about preserving it. It's not just about the money for me. Oh, Wade, my mother sighed. Your grandfather couldn't have anticipated this situation. Family circumstances change. Besides, Tyler added, Samuel left the house to you without restrictions. Legally, you can sell it if you choose, and the financially prudent choice is clear. It's not about financial prudence, I countered. It's about respecting Grandpa's wishes and what the house means to me personally. Rebecca's expression hardened. What about respecting family? What about helping your own niece and nephew have the best possible start in life? The conversation continued to circle around the same points: their insistence that selling was the only reasonable option and my resistance to the idea. Uncle Robert remained mostly silent, occasionally nodding at points made by my father, but offering little direct input. After nearly an hour of increasingly tense discussion, my father finally lost patience. His face flushed red as he slammed his hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. Enough of this, Wade. Your selfishness is unbelievable. This is a free house that you did nothing to earn. Your sister has always worked hard for everything she has while you've been coddled by your grandfather. The unfairness of this accusation left me momentarily speechless. Rebecca had been the one given every advantage while I had worked my way through college with minimal parental support. Either you agree to sell that house and share the proceeds with your sister, my father continued, his voice rising, or you're not my son anymore. I mean it, Wade. This is about what kind of person you choose to be. The ultimatum hung in the air like a thunderclap. My mother gasped softly but didn't contradict him. Rebecca looked down at her plate while Tyler maintained a cool, evaluating expression. Only Uncle Robert showed visible discomfort, shifting in his seat and clearing his throat awkwardly. You'd disown me for not giving Rebecca my inheritance, I asked quietly. I'd disown you for being selfish when your family needs you, he replied without hesitation. Stop being selfish. That's a free house. Either share it or you're not my son anymore. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched dinner. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite the turmoil inside me. I need some time to think about all this. As I walked toward the door, my mother hurried after me. Wade, please, your father didn't mean it that way. We're just trying to find the best solution for everyone. I think he made himself very clear, I replied gently, removing her hand from my arm. I'll be in touch. Driving home, I felt numb with shock. The family I had always tried to please, always tried to understand, despite their clear favoritism toward Rebecca, had just delivered an ultimatum that cut to the core of my self-worth. Sell your inheritance to benefit your sister, or be excommunicated from the family. The next morning I called in sick to work and invited my best friend Marcus over. I needed perspective from someone who wasn't entangled in family dynamics. Marcus listened intently as I recounted the previous night's events, his expression growing increasingly incredulous. That's messed up, man, he said when I finished. They're basically trying to bully you out of your inheritance. And for what? So your sister can have an even fancier house. It's not like they're struggling financially. They made it sound like I'm depriving the twins of a decent home, I said, running a hand through my hair in frustration. That's emotional manipulation, Marcus replied firmly. Rebecca and Tyler already have a perfectly good house. They want an upgrade, not a necessity. Don't let them twist this into you harming children who aren't even born yet. His clarity helped me see through the fog of guilt my family had created. Still, I needed to understand my legal position. Later that day, I arranged a meeting with Martin Coleman, my grandfather's attorney. Martin's office felt like a sanctuary of reason after the emotional chaos of family pressure. He reviewed the will carefully, then looked at me over his glasses. The house is yours, Wade, free and clear, he stated. Your grandfather's wishes were explicit. There are no legal conditions that would compel you to sell or share the proceeds. My family is claiming that Grandpa would have wanted me to sell if he'd known about my sister's pregnancy, I said. Martin's expression softened. I knew your grandfather for over 30 years. He was a thoughtful man who rarely made decisions impulsively. This will was updated just 6 months before his passing, when he was of completely sound mind. He considered all his options carefully. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. What I can tell you is that your grandfather was aware that Rebecca and Tyler might start a family soon. It didn't change his decision about the house. This confirmation strengthened my resolve. Grandpa had made his choice knowingly, not out of oversight or lack of information. As our meeting concluded, Martin shared one more piece of information that illuminated the situation further. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," he said, "but given the circumstances, you should know. Your parents actually expected to inherit the house themselves. They had mentioned to Samuel several times that they were counting on selling it to fund their retirement. He deliberately chose a different path." This revelation explained much about my parents' anger. Their ultimatum wasn't just about Rebecca's needs, it was about their own thwarted expectations. They had counted on the house as part of their financial future and were now trying to salvage something from what they perceived as a loss. Driving home from the lawyer's office, I came to a difficult realization: my family would never respect my ownership of the house. Even if I refused to sell now, the pressure would continue. Every family gathering would become a battlefield. Every milestone in the twins' lives would be an opportunity to remind me of my selfishness. The house that should bring me joy would instead become a source of constant conflict. Something had to change, but surrendering to their demands felt wrong on a fundamental level. There had to be another way, a solution that honored Grandpa's intentions while freeing me from this toxic situation. As I pulled into the driveway of the Craftsman house that evening, watching the setting sun illuminate the stained glass panel in the front door, an idea began to form in my mind. For the next several days, I retreated into solitude within the house, ignoring most calls and texts from my family. I needed space to think clearly away from their emotional manipulation and ultimatums. I told them I was considering their proposal, but needed time to process everything. Each evening after work, I walked through the rooms of the house, absorbing its character, running my fingers along the hand-carved woodwork, and trying to connect with what my grandfather had truly intended by leaving it to me. In his bedroom, I reopened the hidden compartment and studied the old photographs, seeking guidance from the past. One image in particular caught my attention: Grandpa standing proudly beside an elderly woman in front of the house, both holding a plaque of some kind. I hadn't noticed this detail before. Using a magnifying glass from his desk drawer, I could just make out the words "Historical Preservation Society" on the plaque. This discovery sparked an idea. The next morning, I contacted the local Historical Preservation Society and asked if they had any records about my grandfather's involvement. The receptionist connected me with Eleanor Johnson, the society's director. Samuel Harrison. Eleanor's voice brightened immediately. "Of course I remember him. He was one of our most dedicated supporters. That house of his is a perfect example of 1920s craftsman architecture. Is this about the property?" We arranged to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop near my office. Eleanor turned out to be a vibrant woman in her 60s with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and bright, intelligent eyes behind red-framed glasses. She arrived carrying a folder of documents. "I pulled our records on your grandfather's house," she explained, spreading photographs and paperwork on the table. "Samuel worked with us for years to document the historical significance of the property. He was passionate about preserving not just the house itself, but the craftsmanship it represented." She showed me copies of the original architectural plans, historical photographs, and documentation about the house's original builder, a master carpenter who had constructed several significant buildings in the city. "Your grandfather never pursued official historical designation because he worried about the restrictions it might place on future owners," Eleanor explained. "But he always hoped the house would be preserved by someone who appreciated its value." As we talked, I learned that Eleanor had known my grandfather well beyond their work with the Preservation Society. They had served together on community boards and shared a philosophy about the importance of maintaining historical character in developing neighborhoods. "Samuel talked about you often," she said with a warm smile. "He was so proud of your interest in architecture and craftsmanship. He would tell me about projects you worked on together." This personal connection made what I was considering even more meaningful. As our conversation continued, Eleanor mentioned that her daughter Julia ran a non-profit organization called Heritage Homes Education Center, which provided workshops on traditional building techniques and restoration skills. "Julia is always looking for historic properties to use for demonstrations and classes," Eleanor commented. "It's getting harder to find suitable locations as more old homes are demolished for new development." A plan began to crystallize in my mind. "Eleanor," I asked, "would the Historical Preservation Society ever consider purchasing a property like my grandfather's house?" Her eyes widened. "Are you considering selling?" I explained my situation in broad strokes, omitting the more painful details of my family's ultimatum. I want to honor my grandfather's wish that the house be preserved, but my current family circumstances make living there complicated. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. The society itself has limited funds for acquisitions, but we do partner with donors and other organizations for preservation projects. Would you be open to meeting with Julia and me to discuss possibilities? The next day, I welcomed Eleanor and her daughter Julia to the house. Julia, a woman about my age with her mother's intelligent eyes and a passionate demeanor, was immediately enthralled with the property. "This is extraordinary," she exclaimed, examining the original window frames. "You almost never see this level of craftsmanship intact anymore. Most houses this age have had their character elements stripped out during renovations." We spent hours touring the house with Julia, documenting details and discussing the educational potential of the space. We could host workshops on traditional woodworking restoration techniques, period-appropriate renovation. The possibilities are endless. By the end of their visit, a partnership was taking shape. The Historical Preservation Society, in conjunction with the Heritage Homes Education Center, would purchase the house at a below-market price. In exchange, they would guarantee its preservation through a formal historical designation and convert it into an educational center named in honor of my grandfather. The Samuel Harrison Center for Traditional Craftsmanship, Eleanor suggested, a living monument to his values and skills. The idea resonated deeply. This solution would protect the house from future development, honor my grandfather's legacy in a public way, and free me from the ongoing family conflict. The below-market sale price meant I would receive less money than if I sold to commercial buyers, but it felt like the right choice on a soul level. Over the next week, we refined the details. I consulted with Martin Coleman to ensure the legal aspects were sound. The agreement included specific conditions: the exterior and significant interior features would be preserved. My grandfather's workshop would be maintained as a functional teaching space, and a permanent plaque would acknowledge his contribution to preserving traditional craftsmanship. The financial arrangement was straightforward. The society would purchase the property for $575,000, substantially below the market value of $800,000 that Tyler had quoted, but enough for me to purchase a comfortable condo without mortgage stress. More importantly, the sale would come with the satisfaction of knowing I had honored Grandpa's legacy in a meaningful way. We agreed to expedite the process, completing the sale within 2 weeks. I arranged for temporary storage of personal belongings and found a month-to-month apartment rental while I searched for a permanent residence. Throughout this period, I maintained minimal contact with my family, responding to their increasingly urgent messages with vague assurances that I was still thinking things through. The day we signed the papers transferring ownership to the Historical Preservation Society, I felt a profound sense of peace. Eleanor and Julia had already begun planning the center's programming, with the first woodworking workshop scheduled for the following month. They had contacted local artisans who had known my grandfather, several of whom had volunteered to teach classes. "We'll take good care of Samuel's legacy," Eleanor promised as we completed the transaction. "This house will continue to inspire craftsmanship for generations to come." That evening, as I packed the last of my personal belongings, I found myself talking aloud to my grandfather in the empty rooms. "I hope you approve of this decision, Grandpa," I said to the quiet house. "It wasn't what either of us expected, but I think it honors what you valued most." A gentle breeze stirred the curtains in the workshop, sending a swirl of dust motes dancing in the last rays of sunlight. I chose to take it as a sign of his approval. After completing the sale, I moved into a temporary apartment and deliberately maintained a low profile with my family. When they called or texted about the house, I gave non-committal responses, suggesting I was still considering their proposal. This wasn't entirely dishonest. I had considered their proposal and found it lacking in respect for both my grandfather's wishes and my own autonomy. Eleanor and Julia moved quickly to begin setting up the education center. Within days of taking ownership, they had assembled a team of volunteers to catalog the existing features of the house and prepare spaces for workshops. My grandfather's tools were organized and displayed respectfully in the workshop, and informational plaques were created to explain the architectural elements throughout the property. 10 days after the sale, I received a call from my father. "Wade, "We've given you enough time to think," he said without preamble. "Your mother and I are bringing a realtor to evaluate the house tomorrow at 2 p.m. This needs to move forward for Rebecca's sake." I considered telling him the truth then, but something held me back. Perhaps I wanted to see their reactions in person, to witness the moment they realized their assumptions and demands had led to consequences they hadn't anticipated. "I'll meet you there," I replied simply. The next day I arrived at the house 30 minutes early. Through the front windows I could see Eleanor, Julia, and several volunteers already at work inside. A new sign had been mounted beside the front door, the Samuel Harrison Center for Traditional Craftsmanship, with a smaller line beneath it reading, "Preserving the Art of Craftsmanship for Future Generations." Rather than going inside, I waited in my car across the street, watching as my parents' SUV pulled up precisely at 2 o'clock. Rebecca and Tyler arrived moments later in their luxury sedan, followed by a woman in a business suit, who I assumed was the realtor. The group gathered on the sidewalk, talking animatedly as they approached the front walk. My father reached for the doorknob with the confidence of someone who already considered the property partly his. Finding it locked, he rang the bell with visible impatience. Through the car window, I watched as Eleanor opened the door. Even from a distance, I could see the confusion spread across my family's faces. My father gestured emphatically, clearly demanding explanations. Eleanor maintained a professional demeanor, speaking calmly, while pointing to the new sign beside the door. Unable to hear their exchange, I finally exited my car and walked across the street toward the increasingly tense scene. As I approached, Rebecca spotted me first. "Wade," she called out, her face flushed with anger. "What is going on here? Who are these people?" My father whirled around, his expression a thundercloud. "Wade, explain this immediately. This woman claims the house has been sold to some historical society. That's impossible." The realtor, looking profoundly uncomfortable, clutched her portfolio to her chest and took a step back from the family drama unfolding on the front porch. "It's not impossible," I replied calmly, joining them on the walkway. "In fact, it's completed. The Samuel Harrison Center for Traditional Craftsmanship is now the legal owner of this property." "You sold it, my mother," gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Without telling us." "Without consulting us," my father amended, his voice rising. "After everything we discussed." Tyler, always focused on finances, cut to what he considered the heart of the matter. "Who did you sell it to? For how much?" I gestured to Eleanor, who had been standing patiently in the doorway. "This is Eleanor Johnson, director of the Historical Preservation Society and a friend of Grandpa's. The society, in partnership with the Heritage Homes Education Center, purchased the house to create an educational facility that honors Grandpa's craftsmanship and values." Eleanor stepped forward, extending her hand professionally. "It's a pleasure to meet Samuel's family. He spoke of you often. We're very excited about preserving his legacy through this center." My father ignored her outstretched hand. "This is outrageous. You had no right to sell without family input, Wade. We had an agreement." "We had no agreement," I corrected him. "You made demands and issued ultimatums. That's not the same thing." Rebecca, who had been momentarily stunned into silence, found her voice. "You've ruined everything, the baby's future, our plans. How could you be so selfish?" Tyler, meanwhile, had pulled out his phone and was frantically searching something. "The Historical Preservation Society," he muttered. "Non-profit organization, limited acquisition budget." He looked up sharply. "You sold it below market value, didn't you? You threw away hundreds of thousands of dollars just to spite us." The accusation stung, but I maintained my composure. "I sold it to an organization that will honor Grandpa's legacy and preserve what he valued. The price was fair for what mattered most." "What about what matters to your family?" my mother demanded, tears forming in her eyes. "Your sister's needs, your future niece and nephew." "My family issued an ultimatum," I reminded her. "Sell the house to benefit Rebecca, or be disowned." I made my choice accordingly. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You've lost millions for this family," he shouted, drawing attention from neighbors across the street. "That house could have set up Rebecca's children for life. Instead, you've given it away to strangers." Eleanor, who had been observing this exchange with increasing concern, stepped forward again. Perhaps this isn't the best venue for a family discussion. Would you like to come inside? We could talk more privately about the center and how it will honor Samuel's memory. We don't need a tour of what should have been our property, Tyler snapped, placing a protective arm around Rebecca, whose theatrical sobs had intensified. The realtor, clearly wishing to be anywhere else, mumbled something about another appointment and began edging toward her car. Wait, my father called to her. There must be some way to undo this, some legal challenge we can make. The realtor, to her credit, shook her head firmly. If the sale has been completed and recorded, there's nothing to be done. I'm sorry, but I can't be involved in this situation. She hurried to her car and drove away, leaving my family staring after her in disbelief. Julia had emerged from the house and joined her mother on the porch. We've already begun cataloging the original architectural elements, she explained, seemingly oblivious to the tension. The first woodworking class is scheduled for next Saturday. We're expecting a full enrollment. This practical information about the house's new function seemed to finally penetrate my family's anger. The reality of what had happened was sinking in. Not only had I sold the house without their input, but I had transformed it into something that could never be undone. The historical designation that Eleanor would secure would protect it from development permanently. You've betrayed this family, my father said, his voice now deadly quiet. I meant what I said before. You're no son of mine. Rebecca, still crying, added, I'll never forgive you for this, Wade. Never. Tyler, ever practical, was still fixated on the financial aspect. How much did you get for it? At least tell us that. How much did you throw away out of spite? I declined to answer, which only fueled their anger. As they continued to berate me on the front lawn, a van pulled up bearing the logo of the local newspaper. A photographer and reporter emerged, heading toward the house. We're here for the story about the new Samuel Harrison Center, the reporter explained, notepad in hand. Is one of you Wade Harrison? We'd love a statement about your decision to donate your grandfather's house to the preservation effort. Donata, Tyler sputtered. You donated it. Not exactly, I began, but Eleanor smoothly interjected. Mr. Harrison sold the property to us at a significantly reduced price to ensure its preservation, she explained to the reporter. It was an incredibly generous act that will benefit the entire community for generations to come. The presence of the media finally convinced my family that this was not the place to continue their tirade. My father gave me one last withering look before steering my mother toward their car. Rebecca allowed Tyler to guide her away, her tearful glares continuing until they drove off. As their vehicles disappeared down the street, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness at the broken relationships, anger at their sense of entitlement, but predominantly a sense of relief. The decision had been made. The consequences had been faced. Whatever came next would be on new terms, not dictated by old patterns of favoritism and manipulation. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Family conflicts are never easy, she said softly, but Samuel would be proud of what you've done here. This house will educate and inspire countless people because of your choice. Looking at the historic home now beginning its new chapter as an educational center, I nodded. Grandpa always said that craftsmanship was about creating something that outlasts you. I think this decision honors that belief better than anything else I could have done. As I gave the reporter a brief statement about my grandfather's legacy of craftsmanship, I realized I was starting a new chapter of my own life, one free from the shadow of family expectations that had never truly valued who I was. The aftermath of the confrontation was predictably difficult. For several weeks, silence stretched between me and my family like an unbridgeable chasm. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement of my existence. I had been cut off exactly as threatened, and despite knowing I had made the right decision, the finality of it weighed heavily on my heart. I channeled my energy into establishing my new life. With the proceeds from the sale, I purchased a comfortable one-bedroom condominium in a converted industrial building downtown. The open floor plan and exposed brick walls provided the perfect canvas for my own modest woodworking projects, skills I had learned from my grandfather and was determined to continue practicing. My job at the architecture firm kept me busy, but on weekends I often found myself drawn back to the Samuel Harrison Center. Eleanor and Julia had transformed the property with remarkable efficiency. The living room now served as a gallery, showcasing examples of traditional craftsmanship. The dining room had become a classroom with workbenches built to my grandfather's specifications. His workshop remained largely unchanged, preserved as a functional example of a traditional woodworking space. 6 weeks after the center opened, I agreed to teach a weekend workshop on basic joinery techniques. Standing in my grandfather's workshop, guiding participants through the same skills he had once taught me, I felt his presence strongly. The ache of family estrangement was still there, but it was balanced by the satisfaction of honoring his legacy in a way that benefited others. One Saturday afternoon, after concluding a class, I was cleaning tools in the workshop when Julia entered with an unexpected message. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "Your father." My heart jumped into my throat. "Did he say what he wants?" "Just to talk to you. He's in the garden." I found my father sitting on the wooden bench beneath the largest oak tree, the same bench where Grandpa and I had often sat together. He looked older somehow, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. When he saw me approach, he stood awkwardly, hands thrust into his pockets. "Wade," he nodded in greeting. "Dad," I replied, maintaining a safe, emotional distance. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before he gestured to the bench. "Can we sit?" Once seated, he stared straight ahead at the flower beds that the center's volunteers had meticulously maintained. "The garden looks good," he commented. "Your grandfather would approve." "The volunteers have done great work," I agreed cautiously. Another silence stretched between us, until he finally turned to face me. "I came to say I was wrong," he said, the words seemingly difficult for him to pronounce. "About the house, about the ultimatum, about a lot of things." The admission stunned me. My father had never been one to acknowledge mistakes. "What changed your mind?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and your mother and we've had some long conversations. She actually refused to go along with disowning you. Said if I meant it, I'd be losing her too." This was another surprise. My mother had always deferred to my father's judgments. "The thing is," he continued, "seeing this place now, what they've done with it. I started to understand what your grandfather was trying to preserve. It's not just a building, it's something more." He gestured toward a group of visitors being led on a tour through the garden. "Last week I came by anonymously, took the public tour. The guide talked about Samuel's craftsmanship philosophy about building things to last generations. It made me realize I never really knew my own father that way. You did." I remained silent, allowing him space to continue. "Rebecca and Tyler are still angry," he admitted. "They found another house not as grand as they wanted but suitable. They're managing. The twins are due in 3 months." "I'm glad they found a place," I said sincerely. "The thing is, Wade, I realized we were asking you to sacrifice something meaningful to you for Rebecca's want, not need. We've always done that, haven't we? Expected you to step aside for her." The acknowledgement of this lifelong pattern nearly took my breath away. I had never expected him to recognize it, let alone articulate it. "Yes," I said simply. "You have." He nodded slowly. "I'm not proud of that. Your mother pointed out that we never even thanked you for all the time you spent with Dad in his final months. We took that for granted, too." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching butterflies dance among the late summer flowers. "I don't expect instant forgiveness," he finally said, "but I'd like a chance to do better. To be the father you deserve, not just Rebecca's dad." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within me. "I'd like that too," I replied. "It might take time." "Time I've got," he said, offering a tentative smile. "Your mother would love to see you. Maybe dinner next week, just the 3 of us." We made plans for the following Thursday, and as he stood to leave, he looked back at the house with new appreciation. "You know your solution was better than anything we proposed. Dad's legacy lives on here. That matters more than the money ever could." Over the following months, reconciliation came slowly but steadily. My mother, freed from following my father's lead in family matters, revealed a warmth I hadn't experienced from her in years. My father made consistent efforts to connect with me on my terms, even asking to learn basic woodworking skills. Rebecca's journey was more complicated. The birth of the twins, Alexander and Emma, initially hardened her resentment as she blamed me for their inadequate housing situation. But parenthood gradually softened her perspective. When the babies were 4 months old, she unexpectedly brought them to the center. "I thought they should know something about their great-grandfather," she explained awkwardly, "even if they'll never meet him." It was a small olive branch, but I accepted it gratefully. As we toured the center together, Rebecca seemed to see our grandfather through new eyes, appreciating the legacy of craftsmanship she had previously dismissed. "I never really knew him," she admitted, as we sat in the garden watching her husband walk the sleeping babies in their stroller. "I was so busy with my own life I missed knowing someone important." "He would have loved these two," I told her, nodding toward the twins. She smiled faintly. "Would you tell them about him sometimes? Share the stories I never bothered to listen to?" The request was her way of acknowledging what had been lost and what might still be salvaged. "I'd like that," I replied. Meanwhile, my own life expanded in unexpected ways. Teaching at the center introduced me to a community of people who shared my values about craftsmanship and preservation. Eleanor became a mentor and friend, including me in preservation projects around the city. Julia and I developed a close friendship that gradually evolved into something more, our shared passion for architectural history, providing common ground for a deepening relationship. 1 year after the center opened, we hosted a special exhibition of my grandfather's furniture pieces, borrowed from family members and friends who had received his handcrafted gifts over the years. The event drew unexpected attention, including a feature in a national magazine about traditional craftsmanship. Standing in the packed gallery on opening night, surrounded by the fruits of my grandfather's lifetime of skilled work, I felt a profound sense of rightness. My parents and sister were there, genuinely supportive now. Eleanor and Julia stood proudly by the displays they had worked so hard to create. Community members examined the exhibits with appreciation and respect. In that moment, I understood that inheritance isn't just about property or money. It's about values, knowledge, and perspective. My grandfather's true gift wasn't the house itself, but the appreciation for craftsmanship and integrity he had instilled in me. By honoring those values, even at the cost of temporary family peace, I had preserved something far more valuable than real estate. The journey hadn't been easy. Standing up to family pressure required courage I hadn't known I possessed. The pain of rejection was real, as was the grief of broken relationships. But through it all, I had discovered my own strength and the importance of honoring what truly matters, even when it means making difficult choices. As visitors mingled through the exhibition, I found myself standing before the display of my grandfather's favorite handmade rocking chair. Beside it was a photograph of him sitting in that very chair, his weathered hands resting on the arms he had carved decades earlier. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, a man at peace with his life's work. "I did my best, Grandpa," I whispered to the photograph. "Not in the way either of us expected, but I think you'd approve. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect something valuable to you, even when others didn't understand its worth? Sometimes the hardest part of honoring our values is standing firm when those closest to us push us to compromise. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground. Leave a comment about a time when you had to protect something meaningful to you, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength through life's most challenging moments. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we choose to preserve and pass on.